It's Paul Adams from Branson Adams. We're here with a Three Things podcast. I'm joined today by the lovely Catherine Morgan, who works with Concilio. Good morning, Catherine.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and I can tell from your smile that you're doing very well. Now, we generally start these with me asking you, Catherine, where were you born? What was your background? Tell me a bit about your parents.
Okay. I was born in Guildford, not far up the road in Mount Alvernia. In fact, there were nuns and there was a rocking horse. And I remember that really clearly because we used to go there for everything in our lives. I don't know if it's still there now. And I haven't moved far. I have one sister, two half brothers, a mum and a dad. Dad sadly passed away, but he was 51 when I was born. So he had a pretty good innings. He died at 81. And my mum's down the road in Petworth. So, and to top it all off, I have my sister and my lovely niece living with me in lockdown. I'm sure we're no different to lots of families. She's made an exodus from London. And so we've kind of huddled or bubbled up together, which the children love and the adults fight for broadband.
So what sort of work did your parents do?
My mum was a secretary and came from a pretty sort of working class family in Eltham. She's a big Charlton fan for footballers out there. My dad was from Huddersfield and came to London after the end of the war. He was in partition in the war in India and came to London with Unilever because it was a sales job and he could get a car and chase birds. So he came down south and my mum was his second wife. He'd lost his first wife, sadly, and had two boys already in their teens. And my mum was Mark II and we were batch 2, my sister and I. So yeah, my dad was in advertising, and if you've seen Mad Men, the box set, he was a sort of Don Draper of London, with more cigarettes, more whiskey, less secretaries, just my mother. But yeah, so it was a very comfortable life. I'm absolutely fortunate. We lived just near Godalming, went to private school, and one of the things that I always remember from being sort of pre-11 was this insistence that my sister and I both had a lot of exercise. I don't know if it's because my father was a military man, but he felt that having come from really nothing, I mean, he made it in his life, but he really did come from a sort of Huddersfield slum. He was obsessed with education, exercise, routine, and we were signed up to Godalming Swimming Club in Broadwater 3 nights a week. We started in the minnows and went through to something like the whales in my case, and 3 nights a week for 2 hours we would go swimming, training. And my sister, she's probably more aerodynamic than me. She did very well and swam for Surrey and absolutely loved swimming, and it gave her confidence and discipline and so on. In my case, it effectively led to me asking to go off to boarding school as soon as I could, because I knew I could get out of the 3 nights a week, and off I went to be a weekly boarder down in Winchester. So but we both were lucky enough to have a first class education and degrees, and eventually at sort of 21 we were allowed out into the community, by which time my father reckoned that we both had enough discipline, no boys, a fair amount of exercise, and off we went into the world of work. So that's a quick canter through.
Yeah, it's all good. So what did you study? Because obviously
I did English literature with philosophy. So I was a big talker. I always remember being told as a child to stop showing off. And I think this was my last foray into the world of words and drama and theatrics before I went into accountancy. But I did have 3 wonderful years in Canterbury, in the heart of Chaucer countryside, writing plays and making films and studying Shakespeare and really indulging myself in analysis of the great writers and so on.
I suspect you did better than my son, he has actually got an English literature degree, but I'm not sure he read a lot of books to do it.
Well, I don't think any of us did. I mean, I remember all my careers, people at the time saying, do a subject you love and then try and go to the best institution that you can, because if you want to go into business, and you don't necessarily, but a lot of the big graduate employers just want to see that you can think, and showing commitment to a good academic subject, if you're able, is the way to do it. So why disagree? And I loved English, and I wasn't very good at science or maths, so English it was.
And does this bring us to the first of your three things, in that you've got poetry written down?
Probably.
Discovered your love of poetry?
I think, well, I suppose it's love of words and the love of the way people put words together. For happy, for sad, there's always a poem, or there's always been a poem in my life. Again, my parents were very big on that. We had hymns growing up all the time. My father was a chorister as a boy in Huddersfield, and church music was a huge thing. And then bawdy army songs, which my mother mostly didn't let him finish. And through to Wagner and opera and Gilbert and Sullivan and all sorts. So tunes and ditties and lyrics and things like that, were all around us growing up as kids. And I loved poems. I would sit with my head in a book and try and recite. We had in Godalming, there was a thing, it's still going, the Godalming Festival, which is drama and music. It's in the Borough Hall, and kids today, in fact, my godchildren, go in for it, and it's great. It's a way of, I suppose, getting kids to have some confidence, standing up in front of people and talking about something, or playing a tune, or it's just another string to a bow. And I think if you're a show off, as I was, you're utterly in your element.
Can't imagine you'd ever want to show off.
Well, before I went down the rabbit hole of accountancy and numbers, which was seemingly quite random, I
was going to say, we haven't got there yet. We've just released you on your own recognizance at the age of 21, which sounds like you might have gone into accountancy.
Yes, I did. And I put my poetry books away, actually. But I did accountancy because, again, I think a lot of people around me were suggesting that unless I wanted to be a journalist or an English teacher, how would I practically use philosophy and English? And I realized, having had it drummed into me, that we were very fortunate and these things don't come easy, and how are you going to earn money for yourself? So I was pretty motivated after 3 years of drink and rhyme to start knuckling down. And the graduate scheme, as it was then, the milk round it was called, they would all come around, be it sort of the big FMCG companies, oil companies, accountants, lawyers, pretty much everyone in those days was there, and you'd just go from table to table and talk to people. And there must have been somebody there who was quite spirited, who said to me, listen, the exams are hard, but once you get through that, you go out to clients and you get to make presentations and tell them what's what. And I also remember my parents saying, because my mum had been involved in the advertising agency where she met my dad, so she was pretty involved in supporting the board, and my dad was on the board. I remember them both saying the FD in the room was always the one that seemed to have more of a clue than anybody else. And certainly it was a big gap that my dad felt he had, that, well, he finished school at 13, but certainly that the man who had control of the numbers and the money had an advantage over everybody else. So I think I thought that was kudos with my dad if I went and did that. So I did. I went to Ernst & Young in London, got a flat and lived on baked beans, and did the usual thing that a lot of people at the time were doing. And we'd all done random degrees, classics and Greek and geography and German, all sorts. There were very few who'd done maths or further maths or economics. They were just happy to take our little minds as sponges and fill it with debits and credits.
I don't know, in those days, Ernst & Young were really, they used to do this big welcome meeting, and you'd all get your PCs and everything else you were doing and sort of sent off.
Yes, and I have a very funny anecdote, because although in those days there probably were about half and half girls and boys, but for some reason the night that I went to my drinks party, there were, I think, 3 of us, 3 women, and I don't know how many guys, 20 odd guys in the room. And one girl she'd done something to her tights. Basically, she spent the whole evening outside trying to go to a newsagent to find some tights. In fact, she'd laddered her tights. And there was me and this other girl. And she came towards me across the room, and she had a bowl of peanuts which were on the table. And she fell. There was like a sort of ruck in the carpet. It's quite a cheap carpet in the local pub at Waterloo. I never forget. And she fell as she came towards me. And I had peanuts, dry roasted, I remember, hit my face at high speed, went down my blouse. She fell at my feet. And there was this very dirty northern laugh as she picked herself up. And she said, "Hello, I'm Emma Davis. Pleased to meet you." And that was it. We were best mates. She got me through the exams, and I got her through some of the sort of client pitch things, you know, and because she was maths and further maths, of course, she couldn't understand how I couldn't use a calculator, and she helped me find my way around it. And that was it. So a firm friendship that was built.
Well, so what's Emma doing now?
Emma is sort of acting FD at Temperley, which is a clothing designer. She helped Kath Kidston build up the finance function, went to Crew Clothing. She's been all around sort of retail in senior finance roles. She did take a year out and went and did yoga and traveling and did amazing things actually in between. So she's a real inspiration. And it's interesting, you see your sort of, in my case, class of 98, you know, what they're doing now. Some people are partners, some people have built businesses. A friend's running EasyJet finance function, and you know, that sad story for the airlines. I mean, it's amazing what people have done when you look at your peers now that we're all 20 odd years on.
And the airlines will come back. Don't be too sad for them. They had a good run. They'll have a long run into the future as well. And you're right, it's interesting, because I look back, and for me, I'm an accountant. I work in practice. I was always very pure about the numbers, the audit, and the tax. And your second thing is tax, Catherine, which I think can be quite exciting and, you know, daring at times. But given your background at Ernst & Young, I would have thought it was quite dry. So the fact that you love it, tell us more.
So I think tax really again came from my home life, in that I was lucky. I had parents that were very switched on in the world, and I think because my dad was on the client side helping manage a lot of different businesses, he had some really interesting business friends. And in those days, life was work, work was life. And so the people that would come through the house, and the trips, and the sort of dinner parties and conversations, I was very well versed in listening to business debate. And that sounds dry, but it was fun. It was people who were at the top of their game, who had, dare I say it, quite a bit of money to spend and big expense accounts. And I guess I came to understand at a young age how people make the best of the money that they've made in their lives. You know, my dad certainly was more like perhaps a sort of grandparent age than my mum was. And my dad had quite a few crazy colourful investment ideas, forestry and timeshares, and he was a name at Lloyd's, which really meant in the days when individuals were personally underwriting some of the insurance risks in the city, he made and lost huge amounts of money in that, and would share that with us. You know, there weren't secrets when it came to money in the house. You know, we were encouraged to sit down and understand some of these things, not in a laborious way, but I certainly took a big interest in that. And it was all about what you make, and that included after tax. Now, you know, I wouldn't say my dad was a tax dodger, but he also was very scrupulous in terms of keeping an eye on his pennies. He'd worked jolly hard, and he thoroughly understood in the end that, you know, it's only after you take account of tax in your life that you can really assess what you've truly made. And so I think, although I didn't say that earlier when I was talking about accountancy, if I look back now, I realize that's where I got that sort of discipline. You know, the net amount of money you keep, whether that's because you're a salaried employee or you're running a business, or you're looking at your stocks and shares, you know, and your capital gains tax allowance, whether you're humble or, you know, mega wealthy, tax applies to us all. Well, perhaps not if you're mega wealthy, but you know, for law-abiding citizens who pay their taxes, is so important. And you know, you can have a lot of fun. There's tax breaks, there's tax allowances, and I'm not lecturing for a minute, but you know, using up the things that you're allowed to do, like your ISA allowance every year, or things like the EIS scheme, which is where a lot of startup companies get money pumped into them by taxpayers, who get some of the money back that they put in quite quickly, by taking a punt on young companies in Britain. And I've had fun doing that too. So, but you know, very mindful of the tax. And I know there's nothing we can do about it, but it's important to understand it.
You've been listening to me, haven't you, Catherine? Because I was planning, and one of my big things is know your tax rate as you go along.
Yes. And so, okay, this sounds probably quite dark, but I remember my dad doing a forecast IHT calculation. So we had this lovely accountant who's probably still around, who'd come to the house every year, and they would sort of forecast his death. Sounds very dark, but actually I'm 43, and I think, you know, I do this now once a year. The further away from death you do this, the less macabre it seems. So you'd sit down and forecast, okay, this is what I have in my life. Perhaps you own a bit of a house if you're lucky enough. You know, what are the levels there? What's the tax on anything that's left? Crikey, that's a lot of tax to pay. Is there anything I can do about that? Maybe not. Can I do some charitable donations? But it's knowledge. And once you have knowledge, then you can decide whether you want to take some action.
And the big timing, and you know, I'm sure you'll probably agree with this, is when you stop working and retire, or you conscious that there's two single people talking here, you end up on your own, and it's suddenly you got a different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and having a will, and you know, yeah, understanding. I mean, I'm divorced 4 years, and you know, that was a big hiatus in terms of, well, emotionally, but financially for this conversation. There's probably a poem as well, we can go back to that in a minute. Yeah. But financially, you know, to kind of reset again and replan and actually understand the fallout anyway, and allowances and how to move forward. Yes, so divorce and death, and having a child. I mean, I always felt, having had a pretty advantaged childhood, that I wasn't someone who went in for any benefits or allowances or anything. And then I realized, well, things like child benefit, and childcare vouchers for nursery and all those things, you realize they're there and you can take advantage of them. So I'm all in favor of financial education. I think it should be something that's on the school curriculum. I'm a governor at the infant school in Putnam, where my boys have gone through or are going through. But I'd like to, I think, be involved further on. And I think there's something I might do there one day. I watched Martin Lewis and his money program, and I think a blend of what he does plus education and weaving that in for younger people would be really important and really powerful.
And that's it. And this is what happens when you get two accountants talking who've gone nicely down the tax road and tax planning. Call us if you need any help. So what happened at Ernst & Young? Because obviously you're not there now, and you know, how did you get to be where you are now? And I suppose, you know, what happened professionally and personally in the intervening time span?
Well, I had a great love affair, and that's relevant only insofar as the person was actually not in an accounting role, but in more of a sort of sales coach role. And probably, gosh, we've gone left field already. I now look back and realize how much that relationship had an impact on my time as an accountant, because I was very involved sort of socially and romantically, I suppose, in discussions about how our world of work could be more commercial, and how to, watching this person sort of help partners be more commercial, realizing the rather sort of constrained model that people perceive accountants to be at times, and actually in a big firm, how siloed things really are. And it's very difficult to, let's say, build new business if you're a partner in audit or tax, because you don't see the breadth of the firm. And anyway, you've spent your life committing to a really disciplined, rigorous training and being at a depth and not a breadth. And then I think, dare I say it, you become a partner and you're suddenly a business owner and you're expected to build revenue. And how do you do that? And so, I mean, I left soon after I qualified, really. I did a year in the fraud team before I left, but I then went on into corporate. But I then became, I ended up being a head of audit and risk, and I was then hiring and taking the services of the big four accountancy firms who I would have as, jobbing in as auditors within my organization. And it amazed me, and I could spot very quickly the difference between the very commercial ones and the very computer says no. It's a mindset thing. It really is. And that relationship really helped me to see that and to understand that. So much so that, I really do say, and we've talked about this before, there are accountants and there are accountants, and every accountant in this day and age, including my own, who's down the road in Camberley, the best ones are open-minded and pragmatic, and they make connections for their clients. And it's not just about the delivery of that particular detailed service. Does that make sense? I mean, you'll know this. You're not a typical accountant either.
I think I say thank you at this juncture, because
I mean that nicely.
I know. So what happened away from work? Because obviously you got a couple of kids. You already mentioned that you're divorced. So what happened?
Yes. Well, so I don't know if I married late. I always feel like I say I married and had kids late. Got married about just over early 30s. So I lost my dad, and that is, I suppose, quite important. Just a couple of weeks before I turned 30, my dad passed away, and he'd had dementia for 7 years. So he was in a nursing home for a long time. But as you can tell, he was a huge influence in my life, and it hit me very hard. And so I had a fairly long romance before I then got married. And I had 2 boys with Andy, who's their dad, who's a good friend and lives nearby. William is 8, Jago is 6, and I had a great time, I suppose, working in a corporate role and being a mum. But it's a juggle, and this isn't necessarily a pitch for women, but I do think it's something we haven't fixed, and it's going to be a long time in society with business and with the role of women in business before we really crack this sort of what's the role of women. It's too easy to say, well, we should just bung a load of women on boards. Not every woman wants to be a CEO. A lot of people want to be at home and take a step back, take some years out and be a mum. I know I did, but equally that wanting to occupy your mind and have a mental challenge is there. And if you were a bright woman before you had a baby, it doesn't kill your brain, or not for very long, before you then want to be back in the world. But how you manage the two, it's a big interruption for a woman, and we haven't yet as a society kind of got our heads around how to bring women back into work.
I always say at this juncture, you're talking to the wrong man, because my wife passed away when my son was 1, and literally Branson Adams started when he was 2. So yeah, the firm has grown as my son has grown, and it's still just me. So
and I suppose when you're in a sort of trauma or a period of change, sometimes, dare I say it, that can make more change happen. It's very sad, and you're not the only person I can think of who has made extraordinary change on the back of change, if that makes sense.
It does. At the end of the day, where I came from, I don't think I didn't have big decisions to make. If I wanted to look after my son and continue in business, I had to start on my own, because I mean, this is partly where you came from, because employers just didn't get it. Oh, my son's had an accident in the playground, I've got to go now. And it's like, what do you mean you've got to go now? And it's like, well, that's what's got to happen. And I think we're a little bit more enlightened as a community at large than we were. sort of 20 odd years ago. But I still think, as you said, there's massive room for improvement, and we're all individuals.
What I also think that COVID has taken that forward, whether we want it to move forward or not, even professions that are more traditional and have a more sort of pyramid structure of, the men or the most senior at the top, the people who by perception provide the most value, and where people work and how they work. And yes, I remember a lot of the challenge I had, which probably also is linked to the end of the marriage, was just the constant juggle, always having to juggle. And I had plenty of drive and energy and time, but not just 9 to 5. So if I could have worked for my employer like a mad March hare through the weekend or every evening, but have had off sort of 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m., which of course no employer would necessarily be right to give you in those days, I would have been fine. I could have been as productive over my time. And that's, where then leaving corporate life and setting up my own business enabled me to do that. Not because I wanted to take a step back or shift down a gear in any way, just on my terms and for myself.
I'm going to change the subject slightly, because the third thing that you've got written down here is crisps. So when did crisps appear in the life story of Catherine?
Well, crisps are my go-to food, and anyone who knows me will know that. I don't really know why that is. And I've struggled with my weight through my life, definitely. Again, I can hear parents saying, boys don't like girls who like crisps. And that's a line that stuck with me. I always thought, gosh, I should be mindful of my weight from a young age. And I don't mean that in a sinister way. And I'm respectful to things like anorexia. I was at school with a lot of girls that had eating disorders. I fortunately didn't, except my slight sort of addiction to crisps. But in reflecting on coming to do this, and it's probably a bit deep, but it's that we all have a sort of yin and yang in our lives. I think we all have balance, and we can be out of balance. And certainly the year I got divorced and left corporate life and made all that change, 2016 was my big year of change. I lost a huge amount of weight. I went to Slimming World in Tongham, great lady called Angie, and I lost 3.5, 4 stone. And I was breastfeeding at the time, and so that helped. But really, it was the discipline and a switch that I'd never found before, that I just found. It clicked. I wasn't trying hard, which is what I'd always found before when I tried to lose weight. The switch was clicked, and I was in a groove, and I was able to do it. And crisps became a much smaller part of that year. I literally didn't have a crisp, and I didn't have any alcohol, and then it sort of went wrong, because we're only human, and there was a fair degree of self-sabotage. As I think I got comfortable, the change had passed. I'd physically kind of steadied myself and got my body ready to be slim and strong and healthy to get all that change done. And then I sort of relaxed a bit, I think. And that's really my observation, and particularly in lockdown. I've again tried this year very hard to give up crisps, and I failed miserably, and crisps have been my comfort and my solace, as well as other things in my life. But we're looking at another lockdown now, and I'm thinking, actually, these are things that have the potential, whether it's chocolate, whether it's illegal substances, whether it's just yoga, whatever it is, anything in moderation is fine. And we all have to try and sort of have self-care and keep our yin and yang in balance. I actually wrote to Golden Wonder when I was about 10 and asked them if they would make me a sort of flavour of my choosing, and they wrote back and said that sadly they had their crisp strategy pretty well nailed, but they sent me about 20 bags and a whole little summer project that I was able to do on Golden Wonder for the summer. So I am actually a certified crisp expert. And I did look at Tyrrell's when they were looking for money, when they were early stage. I thought, gosh, that would be a great business to invest in posh crisps. And I didn't, and I kick myself for that. So yes,
So is there a favorite flavor, or are you ambivalent?
Frazzles are very good. At this time of year, going into the festive season, I get particularly excited because Marks and Spencer's do a winter berry and prosecco flavor, which everyone in my family thinks is revolting because they're covered in tiny gold stars. I think they must be sort of like edible rice paper, which is the prosecco, and they fizz on your tongue. And I'm sure some people would think that's absolutely revolting, but that's fine because there's more for me in the BP M&S garage. So people may see me in there, and I'm the lady buying up the berry and prosecco crisps.
Well, Frazzles is interesting because during the last lockdown, Tesco's would limit me to no more than 2 or 3 bags of Frazzles.
Really?
Really?
Never mind loo roll. Were you panic buying Frazzles?
No, I was like 3 packets, and I think I put 4 in. It said you've reached the maximum. So I was somewhat surprised when they managed to deliver me 23 bags.
My gosh, you have to stock up by stealth, as I have been doing all year, because I knew it would be a winter of discontent. In fact, I don't know why people are so surprised that we are where we are, because I think, you know, we've had a lot of months to look ahead to the winter and realize worst case we'd be stuck at home with bad weather.
What does the future hold for Catherine? We now know it's not politics.
It could be financial education. I'm very keen on that. I mean, right now, Concilio is the business that I'm working with, which is deep tax specialism, and it's mainly there to help people who've got quite complicated needs and or quite a lot of money. So some people listening might think, well, that's, you know, that's great for them. It's where I've landed right now. It's been a challenging year. I've stopped my own firm and moved across to work with a great team. But broader, I think there's something that joins back up the talking and the words, as well as the numbers for me. So, you know, that may well be something around financial education. So yeah, I mean, I love talking. I love talking about tax and investments and things that sadly I still don't think there are many women or enough women talking about passionately. So who knows? Trying to be a good mum, a good citizen, and yeah, keep going at it. I've got a poem I could leave you with, which
You would be the first. You'll be the first to do that. So let's do that.
Okay, well, you can find this on LinkedIn because I posted it a couple of times, and it's in a book on pensions by this chap Mark Stokes, but it's written by Jesse Rittenhouse, and it's called My Wage. And I'll read it and then I'll leave you to think on it. I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening when I counted my scanty store. For life is just an employer. He gives you what you ask. But once you've set the wages, why, you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn, dismayed, that any wage I had asked of life, life would have paid. So there we are. My little take on that is you can be whatever you want to be because you determine your fate. That's easier said than done. But I love it. It's a great set of words.
Fantastic. Well, Catherine, absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we will talk at some point as we seem to over the years. Take care of yourself and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Take care. Stay well.
So it's Paul Adams, Branson Adams, closing this 3 Things with the lovely Catherine Morgan. Thank you and goodbye.